The time is 1980, where we meet Eric Binford, a shy and socially awkward young man obsessed with classic Hollywood films. Working at a film distribution warehouse and living with his abusive aunt, Eric retreats into his fantasy world of old movies. After a series of humiliations and rejections, including being stood up by a Marilyn Monroe lookalike, Eric snaps. He begins a murderous rampage, adopting the personas of his favorite film characters, such as Dracula and the Mummy. He begins to take revenge on those that have wronged him. Eric explores the dangerous edge where fantasy and reality blur. This week on Back to the Balcony, we discuss 1980's Fade to Black.
Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert, two titans of cinematic review. Sometimes right, sometimes wrong, but always captivating. Your hosts Antonio of the Cult-Worthy Cinema Podcast and Justin Henson of the Movie Wire are here to take you back to the balcony.
So this one has been on my to-watch list for countless years. I can't even tell you how many times I've skipped past this one and just ignored it. And I am grateful for this show to actually force me to sit down and watch this movie. It is a unique watch. It is one of those that makes us reflect on that era of the cinephile, and not necessarily in a positive way, but at the same time, it really is intriguing, not only how Eric takes on his favorite movies, but how the direction and the movie just really captures movies of the past. And I want to say it wasn't a great movie, but it was a good watch down memory lane of just classics. So this one, I think I've viewed now 3 times. And each time it's going to be one of those I'm going to watch again and appreciate it more. I have to say, I enjoyed it. I'm glad I watched it.
I'm glad you enjoyed it too, because this one has been a favorite of mine for years. It was in the second or third episode of the Cult-Worthy. I had it in like my slasher series where I was putting it with other slashers, and the original theme song for my podcast had clips from the film in it. Eric Binford was a boy who loved movies. You know, it was part of it because it's definitely a reflection of people who love movies. And this is one that, like, you know, classic horror people really like, although I wouldn't call it a horror film. It gets categorized in the horror genre, but I would say this is more of like a Hitchcockian homage in many ways. There's a lot of Hitchcock to the characters. There's a lot of that kind of, I'm not going to say like, the psycho hag movies like Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte, but there's representations of it with his crazy aunt, right? Who's raising him, who's very abusive and condescending. It really kind of is the troubled child film that was so popular in the 60s, movies like Twisted Nerve and Who Killed Teddy Bear, but instead it's put in the 80s of this guy who's stuck in that era of classic cinema. It's his obsession. He's making it everything part of his world. And it's just so many Easter eggs of classic cinema. And what I love about it the most, apart from Dennis Christopher's amazing performance, huge Dennis Christopher fan, is the fact that they actually intersplice classic cinema into these moments of the film, almost like they're cutaways. Kind of like what they did did you ever watch the show Dream On back in the 90s HBO, where like he grew up on watching classic TV, so whenever he would have like a cutaway scene, it would be a classic TV sketch. It's exactly that. And it just works so well because it makes you think that you are in an immersive experience more than a movie, where you're actually seeing some of his emotions not only portrayed on screen through his performance, but enhanced by what's going through his mind through the means of classic cinema. Creature from the Black Lagoon, The Mummy, Frankenstein, Dracula. Oh, it's so cool the way they did it. And it is a cult favorite for a reason. It's not made for mainstream audiences. I think it's too slow and involved for mainstream audiences. And that's why even Siskel and Ebert have a hard time putting their thumb on it. And I can't wait till we get to that part of the conversation, because you can really tell who really got what the movie was trying to do and who just kind of passed it aside.
It's interesting that you said this isn't a horror movie because I completely agree to an extent, but this is a movie given the time it came out, and we've talked about evolution of horror before, and I think this was a little ahead of its
Mhm.
time because we see movies now like The Recent Presence or film I just reviewed, the Jenny Pen, that really go to the core of emotional horror or the idea of an obsession that can outburst an emotional reaction to make somebody just feel unsettled to this could be somebody. This could be reality. And in the 80s, I think they thought this was the perfect time with how media was a big contribution to it, of how movies, TV, video games, as we get later into the 80s and 90s, how this could affect the child's mind. So I think this is a movie that really, if it came out today, this would affect it differently because there's a lot more movies and a lot more substance to really kind of contribute to this. And I'm going to get a lot of backlash on this, but this is a movie I would love to see remade today in current times to actually see how culture really can contribute to this. Because when we look at the 80s, when you have that cinephile that was defined to an extent as the weirdo, the one that really is the outlandish one, the outcast, whatever it may be, because these are people that really did have to do their homework. These are the people that stayed after the credits to really pay attention to names, to research previous movies. They didn't have IMDb. They were weird because they were intelligent, smart, because they wanted to know who affected them emotionally, who gave them the experience. So that's what makes this movie very special and given the time frame, because this gives cinephiles a bad name, but at the same time, it's a very smart executed movie on how they do it.
Yeah, and it's not a film that is trying to hurt just anybody, right? Like the guy Eric has his own, he has his own reasons for taking revenge on people, because he is being bullied, he is being teased and accosted and pressured by people in his life, and it's not his fault that he has such a tragic life. And he finds his courage and his strength through the means of these characters that he worships. You know, whether it's a monster or a cowboy or a gangster. I love that it covers all those different genres, and it gives Dennis Christopher room to play with all those different modes and all those different characters that he's emulating. I would say though that, like, if they've, I'm not gonna say they totally remade it, but the idea that we are pulling from the zeitgeist of cinema, in this case cinephiles of, you know, the film age. He has a 16 millimeter projector in his room, he works at a distribution house. I feel like Scream kind of did the same thing, where they were really just utilizing the VHS era of horror films and using it in a meta sort of sense, where it's like all the things that we should learn not to do in horror movies, they do in Scream, and everyone gets killed when they break the rules. That's kind of like the baseline for what that is. This is very similar to that, except it's based off of, you know, old film reels and personifying these characters that existed before, let's say, the horror boogeyman of the 70s and 80s. So I think it's like a great precursor to a film like Scream, where it's very intelligent and it kind of walks the thin line of a meta experience and then a narrative film. And the main reason why it works, the script is really, really smart. It is the performance that does it. Like, I would say next to Anthony Perkins as Norman Bates, Dennis Christopher plays like the perfect troubled young man who's almost an anti-hero. We empathize with him. We want him to kind of take his life back. And then it's that whole thing of like, okay, well, now he really has turned into the monster, and he has this self-realization that he is, where it crosses the line of the bully taking his life back to, well, now I am the antagonist of the movie. I think it's very cleverly done, and you have to be paying attention. You have to allow yourself to experience that part of the movie. Otherwise, you'll be like our one critic and you just find it muddled towards the end. You don't see the roadmap to the finale that they're giving you. You get lost in it because maybe you're just not as big of a cinephile as you thought you were.
I think Scream is an appropriate example. It's a baseline example for this movie because, as I kind of said before, it's an emotional, not, it doesn't aim for gore. It really doesn't even go for the slasher element to an extent because we even have some accidental deaths in here where you can kind of see regret in the performance. You can see regret in the actions, and that's different than just a pure gore fest. This one, as we even get to the climax, we get this King Kong kind of Beauty and the Beast montage that is cleverly placed, and it really defines what this movie sought out to do, which is give an emotional reaction, which is give empathy to this character of where his journey has gotten him. And never once do we forget the origin, the subtle nuggets of the origin story of Eric going into it. We get the ant, we get the bullying throughout. We just don't get kill, kill, kill. And I love that about this movie is we always go back to Eric on what's catapulting him back into madness, into this fantasy world of where he feels safe. So it's never just a slasher movie. And I'll go back to even to say again, I agree it's not a horror movie because we keep going back to the emotional element of what makes this character. And that's what makes this smart writing.
Right. Because like we can't just hate the character from the beginning. The fact that when he is causing violence towards people, it's not Eric doing it. It's the you can say disassociated personality. That's kind of what they're hinting at, but it's not necessarily his personalities. It's these cinematic personalities: the gangster, the cowboy, the monsters, the psycho. You know, when he takes out his aunt, it's essentially the Norman Bates, right? It's things that he's pulling from. They're like the ones that are protecting him, and like you're right, you do see that moment of guilt where it's like, oh my God, what did I do? Well, no, it wasn't me. It was Dracula. It wasn't me. It was Hopalong Cassidy, right? That's kind of where we don't lose the main character. We are willing to stick with him to the end, even to the end where he does, you know, essentially his James Cagney, top of the world, Scarface, Public Enemy ending, right? Which is fantastic. But that doesn't make the movie. You do have to have other elements to project it along, and I think they do a good job with it. You've got the girl that he has a crush on, the Marilyn Monroe, right? You've got the other characters who are bullying him, the Mickey Rourke character, who's like the tough guy bully. You've got the prostitute, you've got his aunt, you've got the guy that steals his movie idea. The moral compensation character of the film is Tim Thomerson as the police guy, right? And I like the fact that he's like out there helping troubled youth. He is the only one that really is trying to save this kid from himself. That storyline is kind of weak. They don't do enough with it, but I'm glad it's there because it does give the emotional support to that character, that someone actually does care about him. Someone does want to save him, but can he be saved? So even though that I feel is a very stereotypical character to add to the movie, a character like that has to be in there so it isn't just a slash and burn kind of horror film.
I think the police, the cop, it's wasted. I 100% agree. I don't think it should have been in there if I were to disagree with you. I think they should have focused more on the Marilyn character to really add more scenes with her and Eric to build kind of that emotional stake, to really go into that climax, to really have a more impact, a more forte going into it. And I think it's a little bit wasted. And we get very limited scenes when it comes to the police on this investigation because we don't have a blood fest per se. It's not like one body after another, after another, after another. It is building the bullying, then the revenge, then the regret. It's very formulaic. And I think that's where we should have focused more on the Marilyn character, the love interest, because that's what the movie is leading up to that big climatic ending of the love. And he's going to have his final moment with Marilyn Monroe. And I think the police shots are just filler. It just doesn't add stakes for me. And I think that was the main issue I had with this movie is that it kind of gets lost in itself when it comes to, well, We have murders. We have to have some police in here. We have to have an investigation. That's not always the case in movies like this. If you're going to stick with an emotional aspect to it and you're going to have this fantasy world, we don't need a subplot. We don't need a sub conflict of the police getting involved. Focus on the story at hand and go after what you intended to do, which is create this fantasy and continue with it. So don't get distracted with all the other elements. So to me, the police didn't work in that aspect of it.
No, I agree with you. I think they're more of a plot driver more than anything because really the saving grace for him is the Marilyn character. She is kind of like the Fay Ray of the movie, right? Where it's like there's fear at first, and then there's like an understanding, a simpatico between she and he. And she would love to save him. And I feel like she wants to save him, even though she is afraid of what he could do to her, because there is definitely those moments of tension where it's like, okay, he's gonna totally kill me right now. But she also understands that he just needs help. And that helps because you would think right from the beginning that she would just write him off as some kind of weirdo. And what propels him into this kind of murder spree is the fact that she does make a date with him, which she stands him up, but not really intentionally. She just kind of lost track of time. She was with that other dude and realized her mistake and felt bad about it, but too little too late. So it's a great way to kind of test the audience's moral compass. Are we blaming her for this, or are we just understanding that he is imbalanced and he was going to break at some point anyway? This just happened to be the catalyst that did it, but it doesn't necessarily mean it wasn't going to happen if she stood him up. I think there's a lot of that too.
I think there's a lot of that, and I think there is some aspects that's never explored where it does ask some questions of what broke him. We have scenes with Aunt Stella by Eve Brent that do have a really big question mark on it. The one scene that stood out to me on, I wish they kind of would have gone a little bit deeper on the amount of abuse other than the verbal abuse that we got, is when he asked for a loan and then she suggestively asked for a back rub, that you kind of
Right.
suggest something else is going on here. And there has to be more to this relationship. And I know this movie targeted was over 2 hours long and had to be cut down. But there's not a lot in 15 minutes that you can tell. But I can almost bet that there is more in the Aunt Stella character that we didn't see. But I think when in a filmmaker's aspect of it, the verbal abuse should be enough, especially when you have loss behind your mind, when you have just this guardian that's reliant on you and is just bashing you on your abilities. So I think that would also be a little bit of a missed opportunity of going further of what was the foundation that got him into this fantasy world. And we kind of leave it up to the audience to kind of decipher that. And I don't fault the movie for that, because I found that more interesting, but at the same time, it's a lingering thought as the movie goes on that I'm wondering, what was the true origin story, not the catalyst of events that really did happen?
I think a lot of it has to do with her. Like, I think that's a great character. I think it's a great performance. She brings a real kind of Shelley Winters, Betty Davis vibe, where she does have that psycho Biddy complex to her, and she's in a wheelchair as well, which makes it even kind of more oppressive. The fact that he's being constantly emasculated by a crippled woman, who knows how she's been taking advantage of him for all these years. But also, like, yeah, there's an interesting backstory there. Like, what if all the films and that memorabilia and stuff, what if that was hers? Or maybe the uncle who is now passed, right? Like, I think there's a lot to that. Maybe she created this monster by keeping him in the house, watching movies, being obsessed with cinema, instead of him being out as like a truant or a delinquent, like so many of the teenagers of the day were. Like, there's a lot to speculate in that film, and it really builds the character. That's one of the things I like about the script, is that you have a good writer when you can have speculation of character development in the movie without it ever actually being on the page or on the screen. They're smart enough to know that they're going to leave you a breadcrumbs to understand motive without painting it out. We've talked about this a lot, not only on this show, but the other show, where we don't need to be handheld We don't need to see a villain's origin story down to the point where he's like 5 years old and what happened over his life to make him a villain. Just give us enough to know that it's not a good life and that he is compensating a life with cinema, and he's compensating a personality and uniqueness by feeling brave and worthy, emulating these characters. We don't get the backstory and we don't need it because there's just enough there to understand something's happened to this kid.
Well, and that's what makes movies of the 70s, 80s, and some of the 90s such great discussion pieces, is because we're not spoon-fed. I can spout off all day long of I want this, I want that, but that's part of the brilliance of the writing here, is to carry us along and all the way to the end until we walk out of the theater, walk out with a friend, family, whatever, and have that discussion of what did this mean? And that's something that we don't get with a lot of thought-provoking movies like this, a lot of horror movies. And even in the 80s, if you wanted to define this at that time as a horror movie, you never got that in real horror movies. You just got the gore, the slasher, the good fun time. This adds, intentional or not, this does add an element of pure discussion of what do you think this character meant? What do you think if Aunt Stella did this? What do you think the outcome would be? And even today, as we talked about a remake earlier, we've come to discover that mental illness, there's real no answers to violence other than mental illness. So we can assume all day long of what the intent is, and this movie guides us along of uh, the instability of mental illness, and it kind of takes us on this journey without fully understanding. And at the end of the day, even to the climax, we really don't fully understand. And in real life today, we're never going to understand acts of violence on what's going on truly inside somebody's head.
It makes me think. I was listening to a podcast. I can't remember which actor it was, but they were talking about how the film's made specifically for streaming services, especially Netflix, probably Hulu as well. They make a lot of made for streaming stuff, Prime and Max. That the studio heads are actually having these rewrite sessions where they are intentionally telling writers to put information drops in their films because they know that people are going to be on their phones and they're only half paying attention to a film. So where in this movie, you need to be paying attention, you need to kind of catch the cues of the character, the history, and not just Eric's, but the reasons why other characters are doing what they do, right? Where in a lot of these films that are made for in-home viewing, not theatrical, they'll drop dialogue where they say a character's name like 10 times in a scene because they need the person who's playing on their phone and half watching the movie to understand who's talking to whom, right? And then really kind of hand-holding and plot dropping so much exposition in the dialogue where it seems unnatural, but they're literally putting it there so people can catch up with the story because they're only half paying attention. It's something I never really thought about until I started thinking about movies that we've bitched about, like the Russo brother movies on Netflix and some of these half-ass thriller horrors that are on Hulu and Netflix. Like, oh, that terrible one where the girl gets paralyzed by that dude in the woods. I forget what it was called, but that still where it's literally just doing all of these moments where they're like snapping their fingers at the screen for you to pay attention because something is about to happen that you need to remember later. This is a great example of when movies didn't have to do that. So yeah, I think a thriller of this sort, as ambitious as it is with all of the character developments it's constantly changing with its main anti-hero, protagonist, antagonist, it's just done beautifully.
I love that you said that because while you're talking, I'm thinking of every goddamn stupid rom-com that's more prominent than not, that and nobody's ever watching on streaming, that repeat the same damn comedic timing, the same music, and the same explosion, if you will, in the background, just to gain your attention. And I was getting angrier as you were talking, not from you, but just for the mere fact it is so obvious and we're so oblivious to
Right,
it.
because you watch a lot more of those than I do for your show. You review stuff like that. I never even bother to watch it. I'm watching all the old stuff and making new discoveries, but I've seen enough of those to understand exactly what they were talking about. where it's like they don't even care about the immersive experience anymore. It's literally them saying, yo, you need to remember this later, so pay attention, look up from your phone for 5 seconds, and then go back to playing on Facebook, right? So yeah.
Might as well just jiggle keys in the screen and then move on to the next scene.
My question for you before we get into the critiques of Siskel and Ebert are, you've known about this movie for years. It's been on your watch list. You know that I'm a huge fan of it. What was your expectation of this film based off what you knew about it? And then how did that affect your viewing experience and total, I don't know, review of the movie?
So, you know me, I try and stay away from reviews. I didn't even watch Siskel and Ebert's review before adding to the list. This one I stayed away from in fear because this is a movie about a guy that loves movies, that goes on a rampage, that has some mental instability. My fear with this movie is that it was going to disrespect not only just kind of cinephiles in a way, but almost the mental state of what media and movies can do to creating a fantasy world. And I think that's what steered me away from this movie for quite some time. Is I was scared that I found it intriguing in the synopsis, but I was terrified of the outcome. I figured I waited years to watch this movie. And after years of waiting for this movie, finally watching it, it was going to be absolutely disappointing and I was going to get angry with it. So, and to an extent, it does a great job. It does a great job on everything that we just talked about when it comes to planting the breadcrumbs, not just being another slasher movie, which I was in fear of based on the synopsis. So this one wasn't a typical slasher movie. Given the time frame of the 80s, that was one thing that was shutting me off from this movie, and it really isn't. It was more of an emotional journey of a guy that you want to root for, but you feel bad for rooting for, but then you feel you want to root for him again. So it's a roller coaster, and it's something that I don't want to say is relatable, but at the same time, you relate to the emotional journey that Eric goes through of bullying, of the loss, or being heartbroken. All these elements really do play a part in madness. And that's what I really did appreciate this movie. And I am so grateful it didn't go the route of a typical slasher film and gone to the stereotypical, I'm going to use these trademark characters and I'm going to just make a gore fest. So I am grateful for that.
And I just think Dennis Christopher is so good in this movie. And it's kind of like a blessing and a curse, right? Where like he is so memorable in the movies that he's been in, but because of his appearance and his personality and his voice, it really kind of narrowed the kind of roles he was probably offered throughout the 80s and the 90s, right? Like he often played either the weakling or the serial killer or the nerd that was like going to figure out the mystery at the end. I'd say most people would probably recognize him as Eddie from It back in the 90s, the Stephen King's It. But I mean, Tarantino loved him and he put him in Django Unchained. He was Mr. Mogi, you know, he had a pretty big part in the last half of the movie. So he does have his appreciators. I wouldn't say that he's as handsome as Anthony Perkins to have that kind of like dangerous, handsome appearance where he might be a psycho killer. We're going to assume he's just a psycho killer. But the fact that he has one of those that guy faces, he's been in a lot of that guy movies and still has his mark in like the cult underground of Hollywood cinema. This probably to me is like his best. It's my favorite performance of all of his. This and Breaking Away. Breaking Away is really good too.
It's hard not to be. His performance is infectious, but not only that, but what really attracts us, it's curious. So, because you don't know how he's going to react or when he's going to snap, because even in the progression of him, you don't see him snap as a human until kind of the middle end of the second act,
Right.
because that's not in character. So he progressively integrates this fantasy into himself without putting on a mask. And you see that throughout conversations with his boss and the bullies and whatever. So I think the integration of the fantasy really is spot on.
All right. So let's hear what our critics had to say about this film. Roger brought it to the show.
Fade to Black is a very creepy and fairly effective thriller about a character who exists almost totally in a fantasy world constructed out of his favorite movies. And this kid is obsessed with the movies. He works in a film storage and shipping warehouse. He goes to the movies every chance he gets, and even when he's home alone, he locks himself into his bedroom with a 16-millimeter projector and a TV set that's tuned to The Late Show all night long. This guy makes us look like occasional moviegoers. His obsession grows to the point that he begins to think he's seeing movie stars everywhere he goes.
So it's going to continue on like that for a little bit. This is one of the things I love about Roger. When Roger is excited about a movie, he always extends his paraphrasing of it, right? He wants to give you all of the details that he noticed that actually trigger him or intrigue him. The fact that he put out all those little pinpoints of the film about the fact that he watches a Late Show all night, the fact that he has a 16-millimeter projector and all the memorabilia in his room, and that's just the first 30 seconds of his synopsis, and he's only given us that much about the character. It means that he is very intrigued by that character because he sees a reflection of himself in that. It's like, oh my God, I was that guy who was watching all these shows and essentially absorbing movies. No wonder I'm Roger Ebert now, right? I always know that I'm in for a good time with Roger when he gets that detailed about a synopsis.
Not only that, but he goes up an octave.
He does.
Versus a movie that he actually hates, that it's like a dad saying, I'm disappointed. So he gets excited. There's a pep in his step. There's an octave above, and he does go into that prolonged synopsis of it. And you can tell he's going to get excited on... It's almost like he's trying to speed through his review before Gene can give him a look or a comeback in the middle of his synopsis. He just wants to rush through it because he's so excited.
Like, let me finish.
And let me just finish before you give me that little glare. So this one, I love the introduction to this one so far. I think he does a great job on building the excitement for it.
Especially because it's a movie that he knows that not a lot of people are going to go flock to. There's no big stars in this movie. It's still considered a genre film before horror has really taken off. Like, we haven't gotten Friday the 13th yet. We haven't gotten Nightmare on Elm Street. We're still in the early spawning pools of this kind of cinema from the late 70s to early 80s. And this kind of, just like I said, it gets lost in the shuffle, but it's definitely seminal in my opinion. He keeps on going.
It was Dennis Christopher as the movie maniac. You may remember him as the star of Breaking Away, the kid racing the bicycle. And Linda Carriage did an incredibly good job there in that scene of imitating Marilyn Monroe. The opening scenes of Fade to Black are all sort of like that, with reality sliding off into fantasy. But then that girl stands the kid up, and then his aunt smashes his movie projector. That's really going too far. This kid goes berserk. He dresses up like his favorite movie heroes and goes out to get even with the world.
I think he is in love with this character.
He is in love with it because I think Roger has kind of the energy matching the fear I had before watching this movie. I hope this is a movie about a film buff. Please don't make it look horrible. Don't make me look weird. Don't make me look like one of those guys. And it really doesn't. And I think Roger appreciates that too. Again, we go back to, these are the guys or the viewers that really did have to spend time researching. And Eric is a guy that can spit any character, any actor off the tip of his tongue and relate to a vision of even a script or a concept of a movie that he wants to do and have a vision of it. So this is almost like an on-screen filmmaker that's more professional than I can guarantee you some of the critics that reviewed this movie.
No, I agree. And he goes even deeper into it.
Fade to Black is fairly predictable. Once we see what movie character he's dressed up like, we can almost predict what he's going to do. But I sort of like this movie. It's not an all-time great thriller, but it does have a certain offbeat appeal to it. And Dennis Christopher is really weird and creepy as the killer. This is nothing like his performance in Breaking Away, which is probably why he wanted to do this movie.
So I think we've discussed movies like this before, where it does take a certain kind of predisposed cinematic knowledge to appreciate a movie like this even more. They help you out by inserting, old film clips like Creature from the Black Lagoon and Dracula and White Heat. Like they help you out, because I feel for some audiences, if they did not have that help from those film clips, they might not know which character he's emulating, right? So it does take a little bit of, a prerequisite of cinema knowledge but they do help you out to understand like what character he's actually doing. I like that, but also that can be the detriment to this film. If you aren't a true lover of classic cinema, you won't care. But if you are a fan, you're going to be jumping out of your seat because you're like, I know who that is. I've seen that movie. I know exactly what he's going for. That, I think, is such a great gimmick. And, obviously it didn't land that great with mass audiences, but the people that appreciate it appreciate the hell out of it.
Absolutely. And of course, it ties into movies of the 50s like Hopalong Cassidy and all that not a lot of people are going to be familiar with. So you have to throw in The Mummy, Dracula, that never used the actual clip. It was, oh God, what was it? Horror of Dracula, I
Right.
think, is a clip that they used or something like that. So you're going to have those familiar characters. And I almost want to retract the statement I said earlier, saying if this was remade today, it'd be like a big budget Who Framed Roger Rabbit and throwing all these recognizable characters out there and not honoring the past of what made cinema great,
Right.
what made performances great. So, and I love that this movie did that because in the 80s, a vast audience isn't going to be familiar with Hopalong Cassidy. They're not going to be familiar with some of these characters. So, but there is enough here to really entice what's going to happen next with this character on how they're going to kill. So I think the machine gun scene in the barber shop was something that would entice somebody to go say, I want to see that character in that movie. So I think that's what this movie honors. And I love Roger bringing that factor up of just kind of recognizing that aspect of the film.
Yeah, 100%.
I think you're right. He's very good in the best part of the film, except for that actress, Linda Carriage, as Marilyn Monroe. The film opens wonderfully, and I was rooting for it, but then I felt it degenerated. It got more and more violent with scenes like that, a lot of blood, a stick going through somebody's heart, that girl there. I thought that this film really fell apart at the end, and I was disappointed after such a nice beginning.
I can't disagree with him too much using your logic. The logic that you bring to the show of like, okay, what will the average everyday cinema goer experience, and is it going to be worth their $10, $15, $20, right? I totally get what he's talking about because there are moments in this film that I give it the patience to get through because I know what's coming, right? But if this was my first watch and I wasn't as into these classic movies or this character as much as I am, I can see exactly what he's talking about. It does stumble into the third act before its climax because I feel like it doesn't know how to humanize him. Or dare I say, it doesn't know how to make him feel too human. He still has to have a sense of danger. There still has to be there still has to be a sense of danger. There still has to be that ominous presence to him, but not turn full villain because then the climax doesn't have the weight that it does. So it does kind of stumble over itself to make its point at the end. But like I said, I love the film so much that I am patient with those sluggish scenes that are kind of like cliche and gimmies just to get to the last part of the movie.
So I don't think it's the climax per se, and that's where I'm going to kind of disagree because it's not necessarily what happens at the end because I enjoyed the climax. What I didn't enjoy
Right.
is the transition to the climax or the middle that goes into it. So you can have an appealing climax, and if it doesn't work, then it's everything that builds up to it. I think we got into a disagreement about the substance that I didn't like the
Right.
climax, but I loved everything else about it. Is I just didn't feel that transition was earned or went on too long. So here, visually, I loved it. I love the tragedy aspect of it, but I just don't think it really got there to kind of your point is there is no emotional human aspect to him that it really does transition to say, God, I hope he lives. I'm rooting for this guy. And I don't know if the filmmakers really wanted that, but at the same time, there has to be a clear message on how we should be feeling versus the rest of the movie that leaves a big question mark. We should love him or hate him, but we shouldn't have this. What's the word I'm looking for? This question of does he deserve the outcome? Does he deserve the fate that led to him when he has this dream girl next to him? He has this dream sequence right before that tried to transition it, but we didn't get a transition before that. So it's transition after transition, trying to lead up to something to the climax that never really does land. But I actually don't think it fell apart at the complete end. I think just needed 5 minutes, 10 minutes more to really transition the audience
Yeah,
on
I agree with
how we
that.
should feel about this man.
I liked it. I felt it had to end like that. It's a horror thriller. It's almost inevitable that this kid is mentally deranged. He's going to get more and more violent. That's the way the movie has to go.
Well, I just wish that it had been done with more of a spirit and love of movies throughout than just routine bloodshots.
Well, I think there are two attitudes toward how you feel about old movies. On the one hand, you can say, how come it didn't have more spirit, of the love of old movies? On the other hand, I've met, and I'm sure you've met, people who really are obsessed with old movies
Yes.
to almost to an unhealthy degree. They get that strange light in their eyes while they corner you at parties and drill you with details about insignificant events in the movies. And this is a kid who just got pushed over the edge. He just lost his grip on reality. I like the fact that the movie went all the way with it.
Okay, and I did.
I think that this is one of those examples where Gene is being contradictory just to be contradictory, right? Because there is not a single murder in this movie. There's not a single act of bloodshed that isn't thematically attached to a piece of classic cinema. They're not just willy-nilly kills. They all lead up to something, to the point where pretty much the entire film has like a very kind of flat, matted appearance to it in its lighting, in its cinematography, until there's a kill scene. And that kill scene is often lit and framed the exact same way the horror movie or crime movie that he is emulating is. So all of a sudden now there's lighting from behind, from above, from below. It changes the whole perception of the scene. So I think that that's something he completely overlooked, is that with each kill, there is a change in the style of filmmaking and cinematography to match that movie. And then when it goes back to the real world, we're back to like this boring, flat, matted perspective again. That's brilliant. And I just don't think he either noticed it or he's being contradictive just to be contradictive.
I think was shut down by the second act because, like he said, he enjoyed the first half where we zero in on the character, the abuse, and we see kind of a deep dive in how this character is being treated, how Eric's being treated. He contradicts himself, and I don't agree with it, where he says it's just a bunch of kills, a lot of gore, a lot of blood. There really isn't in
Right.
this movie. That really does define this movie as just kind of what I think he is perceiving at this point to be just another hack and slash. That's not how I would define this movie. So to me, I think he wanted something different. And being a film lover as Gene and Roger, I think he wanted this movie to speak to a character study of a film lover. And he doesn't really get it. So, and I don't know if that's the marketing going into this movie. I haven't seen the trailer to it. But at the same time, I think the expectation of what he wanted versus what he got in the first act didn't match what his overall want was. And that led to a disappointment with the outcome of Gene's review.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And that is one of the issues that we seem to be facing with Gene quite a bit. It almost feels as if Roger gets too excited about a film that Gene is just kind of borderline on, that he'll instantly kind of like try and bring the energy down because, okay, Roger, it wasn't that great. Stop saying it's so great or that it's so original. It's really not. Again, it's him just kind of being petulant. And we've just done like 70 episodes now. So I think we kind of know at this point when we see it happen.
You can almost hear him during Roger's review, during that single chuckle, like he's preparing to take him down a notch. These two knew each other left and right. They knew, and Gene knew Roger was excited about this, and you can see the gears turning on how you're going to take his probably 3-star review and make it a 2-star on average video review.
And so I was looking into the other critics, and now what I do is I just look at my Leonard Maltin book anytime we do one of these, and Leonard Maltin gave it 1.5 stars. Essentially, he gave it a bomb. He just called it like simple, exploitive, and I'm like, dude, that's my problem with Leonard Maltin. It's like he can't let a win be a win. It's either a masterpiece, which most of the ones he says were masterpieces aren't, in my opinion, or it's a bomb. And more often than not, the ones that he says are bombs, I actually am a huge fan of. So I'm glad that we're doing a Siskel and Ebert podcast and not a Leonard Maltin one, because I just never can be on the same page with that guy.
Well, this one, here's the cynical side of me is you take a movie about a film lover and it goes to the critics that are film lovers. It's
Right.
almost going to be different eyes. And I even am victim to it. I avoided this movie because I love film and I didn't want to see this movie because of that fact, but they had to see it. And because of that, it didn't meet their standards, whether they didn't have the characters they were hoping it's in that was inserted in this movie or they weren't portrayed correctly. They had an expectation, and there is no way this is a 1.5 star movie when it comes down to it, because there is more good. If you wanted to trash this movie, at most, this is a 2 star, at most, because there is good performances, there's good filmmaking, there's good direction, and there's smart writing. So those elements doesn't contribute to a 1.5 star. It's your expectation of what you wanted from a movie about a film lover that's viewed by a film lover.
So when it comes down to rating our critics, yeah, this is a bad week for Gene for me. I do not like any of his opinions. I do not like any of his discourse with Roger on this one. I think he's just trying to be contrarian. And so for that, I'm giving him a C.
Completely fair. When it comes to Roger, I love his excitement. We talked about it. I love his energy with it, and I love his synopsis. But at the same time, I am going to dock him a little bit because the synopsis overruled opinion, and I wanted more of the opinion. I wanted more of a combativeness to Gene when it comes to why watch this movie. He goes into it, but it wasn't specific. It wasn't, why should you go see this movie? Was it horror? Was it an emotional journey? You love the Eric character. We get that. And I think that's what we're in unison about, is that we love the performances here.
The performance and the character, yeah.
Absolutely. So I think Roger should have combated and fought for it a little bit more when it comes down to it. And that's going to set him back a little bit. But it's a solid review. The excitement's there to entice somebody to go see this movie. And I recommend that they do. So I'm giving Roger a solid 3 stars on it.
Yeah, I think 3 stars is great because he likes the movie and you can tell he's being safe. He's not going to call it a masterpiece because it's not, but he's giving you all the best reasons to go see it, even with the caveat of, hey, you'll probably appreciate it more if you're already a cinema lover, which is what we've been discussing this whole time. Like, there is a prerequisite to, I think, really enjoying this movie for what it is. So yeah, I'm glad we finally got to this one. Like, I didn't even think we were going to do it till you put it on the list. I was like, oh, wow, a movie that I've been championing for years and you haven't seen it, and I can't wait to get your opinion because literally, like, I don't know any movie lovers that don't love this movie because I think deep down, we all have a little Eric Binford inside of us, right? Like, if we went off the deep end, we would probably use cinematic characters to be our influences or instruments of dealing with people we don't like. At least that's how I think.
Not to sound creepy, now the gears are turning in my head. If I snap what character I want to be. So results later in the show.
Excellent. Okay, so next week, adding on to the, I guess, new discovery films that we've never heard of or seen, I'm bringing to the show one I've never even heard of, 1979's Bloodline, starring Audrey Hepburn, James Mason, and Ben Gazzara. When I found this one in their list of episodes, I was like, what is this movie? And how have I not seen an Audrey Hepburn movie from 1979 that's rated R? That piqued my interest, so I can't wait to watch this one and discuss.
My interest to speak on this one. A rated R, Audrey Hepburn, count me in.
Right? Yeah. So we'll see. We've been let down before by things we were excited to talk about, but I'm going to go into this one with a positive attitude. I feel that this one might actually be something in my wheelhouse. So yes, can't wait to talk about that. All right, everyone. Thank you for watching, listening. Go watch Fade to Black. If you're listening to this podcast, I assume you're a movie lover. So I think you will really enjoy this movie and all the things that it does for cinephiles like us. Don't forget to like, review, rate our show on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, subscribe, and review on YouTube. You can find me, Antonio, and my other show, The Cult Worthy Cinema Podcast, at thecultworthy.com. You can find my co-host Justin over at
themoviewire.com.
And we will see you next week.
See you next week.